Everyone assumes power looks like a chiseled jawline, a tailored Italian suit, and a loaded weapon resting on a mahogany desk. They are wrong. True power often hides in plain sight, wrapped in a body society aggressively tells you to ignore. She was undeniably fat, chronically invisible to the men in tailored suits, and unequivocally the smartest person in any room she walked into. He was a ruthless syndicate heir who trusted absolutely no one. When the city's deadliest rivals tried to bury him, they didn't factor in the chubby accountant he kept by his side. They laughed at her. They called her a sad liability. By the time they realized she was the mastermind dismantling their entire empire, it was already entirely too late. The fluorescent lights of the Midtown Manhattan accounting firm hummed with a sterile, soul-crushing buzz. Hazel kept her head down, her thick, dark hair falling forward to shield her face from the harsh glare and the peripheral judgment of her colleagues. At 28, she was accustomed to being the smartest and the heaviest woman in the room. Society had a way of punishing you for taking up space, and the corporate world was no different. While the junior partners with their slicked-back hair and gym-toned physiques schmoozed clients over 3 martini lunches at Le Bernardin, Hazel was left in the bullpen. She was the firm's secret weapon, a brilliant forensic auditor whose mind processed numbers, anomalies, and hidden offshore accounts with the terrifying precision of a supercomputer. Yet she was practically a ghost. Her boss, Elliot, frequently took credit for her late-night discoveries, passing off her meticulous financial breakdowns as his own stroke of genius. Hazel tolerated it because the paycheck kept her sick mother in a comfortable private care facility in Queens. She wore conservative, ill-fitting dark suits purchased off the rack at Macy's because the high-end boutiques on Fifth Avenue didn't stock size 20, and she tried her best to remain unseen. Until the day Gabriel Costa walked into the boardroom. Gabriel wasn't just a client. He was an urban legend whispered about in the break room. He was the head of Costa Logistics, an international shipping empire that everyone knew was a legitimate front for one of the most powerful and violent syndicates on the eastern seaboard. He was 32, ruthlessly handsome, with piercing dark eyes that seemed to strip the pretension from anyone he looked at. He didn't wear flashy designer logos. His suits were bespoke, cut perfectly, to a broad, muscular frame, whispering wealth rather than shouting it. The firm had been called in to audit the Costa family's internal accounts, a routine check Elliot had assured the partners. But Hazel, who had spent the last 48 hours buried in the raw data, knew there was nothing routine about it. She sat at the far end of the sprawling glass conference table, a silent observer, while Elliot sweated profusely through his presentation. Elliot confidently clicked through the PowerPoint slides, assuring Gabriel that the shipping manifests and the Cayman Islands subsidiaries were perfectly balanced. "As you can see, Mr. Costa," Elliot said, his voice trembling slightly, "your asset diversification is functioning smoothly. We project a steady 15% growth in clean revenue for the next quarter." Gabriel didn't look at the screen. He leaned back in his leather chair, tapping a heavy gold signet ring against the mahogany armrest. The rhythmic clink, clink, clink echoed in the suffocating silence of the room. He was flanked by 2 massive men whose tailored jackets couldn't conceal the bulk of their shoulder holsters. "Smoothly," Gabriel repeated. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that commanded instant obedience. "You look at these numbers, Elliot, and you see everything running smoothly." "Yes, sir. Absolutely." Gabriel stopped tapping. He looked around the room, his gaze sweeping past the terrified partners until it landed on the far corner, until it landed on Hazel. She froze. She was holding a thick manila folder against her chest, her knuckles white. She tried to shrink into her oversized blazer, But Gabriel's eyes locked onto hers with the intensity of a predator, spotting an anomaly in its environment. He noticed the way she had winced when Elliot mentioned the Cayman subsidiaries. "You," Gabriel said, pointing a single scarred finger at her. The girl in the corner. "You disagree." The entire room turned to look at Hazel. Elliot let out a nervous, patronizing laugh. "Mr. Costa, please excuse her. Hazel is just a junior analyst. She mostly handles data entry. She doesn't have the full picture." "I asked her not you—" Gabriel snapped his voice, dropping a dangerous octave. He looked back at Hazel. "Well, tell me what you see." Hazel swallowed hard. Her heart was hammering violently against her ribs. She had never spoken in a client meeting before, let alone contradicted her boss in front of a Mafia boss. But the numbers didn't lie, and she hated bad math more than she feared Elliot. She stood up, clearing her throat. The sheer mass of her body felt exposed under the scrutiny of the room, but as soon as she opened the folder, her anxiety vanished, replaced by the cold, hard comfort of logic. "Elliot is wrong," Hazel said quietly, but her voice carried. "Your assets aren't growing, Mr. Costa. They are hemorrhaging." Elliot's face turned a violent shade of purple. "Hazel, sit down this instant. Let her speak," Gabriel ordered, standing up slowly. He walked around the table, approaching Hazel. He didn't look at her with disgust or pity, the two expressions she was most used to. He looked at her with genuine predatory curiosity. "Show me," Gabriel murmured, leaning over her shoulder to look at the papers. She could smell his cologne, something expensive, smelling of bergamot tobacco and danger. "Right here." Hazel pointed a slightly trembling finger at a column of figures. The shell company in Grand Cayman Apex Holdings. Elliot flagged these transfers as routine operational costs for ship maintenance. But if you cross-reference the port logs from your Miami docks, none of the ships listed were in port during these payment cycles. They were out at sea. You can't perform dry dock maintenance on a vessel halfway across the Atlantic. Gabriel's eyes narrowed. "Keep going." "It's an embezzlement loop," Hazel explained, her confidence growing. "Someone inside your organization is generating fake invoices for phantom repairs. They route the money through Apex Holdings, wash it through a boutique real estate firm in London, and then it disappears into private crypto wallets. Over the last 8 months, exactly $4.2 million has been siphoned out of your legitimate front." The silence in the boardroom was absolute. Elliot was practically hyperventilating. Gabriel stared at the numbers, his jaw tightening into a hard line. He didn't need to ask if she was right. He knew a devastating truth when he heard it. He slowly turned to look at Hazel. For the first time in her life, a man looked at her and actually saw her. Not her weight, not her frizzy hair, but the razor-sharp intellect she hid behind her quiet demeanor. "Who has authorization for those transfers?" Gabriel asked softly. "Your cousin," Hazel replied without hesitation. "Mateo. He's the only one with the dual signature authority for the Apex account." Gabriel's expression remained entirely impassive, but the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. He closed the folder, tapped it once, and looked at Elliot. "You're fired," Gabriel told the senior partner, "and your firm is finished. If I find out you were complicit in this, I will return to have a very different kind of meeting." Gabriel turned back to Hazel. He reached into the inner pocket of his suit, pulled out a sleek, matte black business card, and slid it across the table toward her. "Be at the Waldorf Astoria tomorrow morning at 8, Gabriel said. "You work for me now." The transition from a cramped cubicle to the penthouse suite of the Costa Logistics headquarters overlooking Central Park was jarring, to say the least. Hazel arrived the next morning, wearing her best navy blue suit, feeling painfully out of place amidst the Italian marble floors, floor-to-ceiling glass windows, and a staff composed entirely of people who looked like they had stepped off a Milan runway. The female assistants were tall, razor-thin, and dripping in designer labels. They looked at Hazel as if she were a lost delivery driver who had stumbled onto the executive floor by mistake. But Gabriel Costa was not a man who cared about runway aesthetics when his empire was on the line. He met her in his private office, a sprawling space adorned with dark wood leather and abstract art. He handed her a steaming cup of coffee and a laptop loaded with the highest level of encrypted access. "Your title is Chief Financial Strategist," Gabriel told her, sitting behind his massive desk. "Your salary is quintupled from what that parasite Elliot was paying you. You get a private driver, full medical coverage for you and your mother, and absolute autonomy over my books. No one questions you. If they do, they answer to me." Hazel sat frozen, clutching the coffee cup. "Why me?" she blurted out. "You could hire anyone. Ivy League graduates, seasoned executives. I'm just me." Gabriel leaned forward, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Ivy League graduates are arrogant. Seasoned executives are corruptible. You saw something my own blood tried to hide from me, and you had the spine to say it out loud in a room full of men trying to silence you. I don't need a corporate puppet, Hazel. I need a mind like yours." Over the next 3 months, Hazel became indispensable. She practically lived in the penthouse, untangling the massive complex web of Gabriel's finances. She optimized his legitimate shipping routes, saving him millions in tax loopholes that were entirely legal but required a genius to navigate. More importantly, she cleaned house. Following the discovery of his cousin's betrayal, a situation Gabriel handled internally and permanently, the details of which Hazel wisely chose not to inquire about, she implemented a financial security net so tight that not a single dime could be moved without her authorization. Despite her immense power within the organization, the whispers never truly stopped. The mob was a hyper-masculine, superficial world. To the capos and lieutenants who answered to Gabriel power was synonymous with physical dominance or striking beauty. Hazel possessed neither in their eyes. She was soft-heavy and unassuming. The tension boiled over during a high-stakes sit-down in Gabriel's office. Jasper Hayes, the head of a rival faction that controlled the city's construction unions, had come to negotiate a territory dispute. Jasper was a snake of a man in a flashy silver suit, known for his cruelty and his endless rotation of model girlfriends. Gabriel and Jasper were going over the profit-sharing margins for a new downtown high-rise development. Hazel sat silently beside Gabriel, cross-referencing the proposed union payouts on her tablet. "We need 60% of the union kickbacks, Gabriel," Jasper sneered, puffing on a thick Cuban cigar. "My boys are the ones doing the heavy lifting on the ground. It's only fair." Hazel didn't look up from her screen. "The math doesn't support that, Mr. Hayes," she said calmly. "Your union dues are already inflated by 20%. If Gabriel cedes 60% of the back-end profits, you aren't just covering your operational costs. You're bleeding Costa Logistics dry to fund your private slush fund in the Bahamas." Jasper froze. He lowered his cigar and turned to look at Hazel, his face contorting into an ugly sneer. He looked her up and down, making a deliberate, exaggerated show of evaluating her body. "Who the hell is this?" Jasper barked, laughing bitterly. "I didn't realize we were taking financial advice from the Michelin Man. What's the matter, Gabe? Couldn't afford a real accountant, so you hired a baker who eats all the profits." The room went dead silent. The 2 bodyguards standing by the door shifted uncomfortably. Hazel felt a familiar burning flush creep up her neck. She dropped her gaze to the tablet, her heart sinking. She was used to insults, but they always stung, reminding her that no matter how brilliant she was to men like Jasper, she was merely a punchline. She prepared to apologize and excuse herself, falling back into her lifelong habit of retreating. "Jasper," Gabriel's voice was dangerously soft. It was the tone of a safety being clicked off a loaded gun. Hazel looked up. Gabriel hadn't raised his voice, but his posture had shifted. The relaxed, confident boss was gone, replaced by something lethal and terrifying. He stood up, slowly walked around the desk and stopped inches from Jasper's chair. "I want you to put your cigar out," Gabriel instructed calmly. Jasper scoffed, trying to maintain his bravado, but a bead of sweat appeared on his forehead. "Come on, Gabe, it's just a joke." Gabriel moved with terrifying speed. His hand shot out, grabbing Jasper by the back of his neck and slamming the man's face down onto the glass surface of the coffee table. The thud echoed violently in the room. Jasper gasped in pain, dropping his cigar onto the carpet. Gabriel leaned down, pressing his thumb into the nerve cluster at the base of Jasper's skull. "That woman," Gabriel whispered, pointing his free hand toward Hazel, who sat completely paralyzed in shock, "is the architect of my empire. Her mind is worth more than your entire miserable life, your crew and your cheap unions combined. You are breathing my air right now because she allows it on a spreadsheet." Gabriel pulled Jasper's face up an inch from the glass. "You will apologize to her, and then you will accept 40%, or I will let my associates take you to the basement and ensure you never speak again. Do you understand?" I'm sorry." Jasper choked out his eyes wide with genuine terror as he looked at Hazel. "I'm sorry, miss. 40%. It's a deal." Gabriel released him, disgust evident on his face. He smoothed his tie and walked back around his desk as Jasper's men practically dragged their boss out of the office. When the door clicked shut, the silence returned. Hazel's hands were shaking so badly she had to put her tablet down. She looked at Gabriel, expecting him to be furious about the disruption. Instead, he poured a glass of Macallan whiskey and handed it to her. "Drink," he commanded gently. Hazel took a shaky sip, the amber liquid burning beautifully down her throat. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered, looking down at her lap. "I'm used to it. People look at me and they only see one thing." Gabriel walked around the desk and knelt on one knee in front of her chair, forcing her to meet his gaze. It was a profoundly intimate gesture that made Hazel's breath catch. He reached out his large, rough hand, gently tilting her chin up. "Listen to me very carefully, Hazel." Gabriel said, his dark eyes intense and unyielding. "In my world, men die every day because they underestimate what is right in front of them. Let them look at you and see what they want. Let them think you are weak or soft or irrelevant. It gives you the ultimate advantage." He let his thumb brush softly against her jawline, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "Because I know exactly what you are. You are a predator, Hazel. Just like me. You just use numbers instead of bullets. Never apologize for taking up space in my room again." Hazel's integration into Gabriel's inner circle was absolute, and with it came an unspoken, deeply profound intimacy. They spent late nights in the penthouse, poring over global market trends and syndicate logistics, eating take-out Chinese food on the $1 million Persian rug. Gabriel didn't just protect her. He relied on her, valued her, and increasingly he looked at her with a heavy, simmering heat that terrified her as much as it thrilled her. He never pushed, never made her feel uncomfortable, but the electric tension between them was a physical presence in the room. But peace was an illusion in their world. 6 months after Hazel joined the Costa family, Gabriel faced a critical juncture. The Irish faction, a brutal syndicate controlling the docks in Boston and extending their reach southward, had requested a truce. They were led by Liam O'Connor, an old-school mobster, with a reputation for savage, unpredictable violence. Liam proposed a massive joint venture combining Costa Logistics shipping routes with the Irish faction's political influence to dominate the entire eastern seaboard's import market. The summit was set at Pappy's Steakhouse, a legendary, notoriously exclusive, dimly lit establishment in Miami, where mob bosses had brokered deals for decades. It was neutral ground. Gabriel was taking his top 2 lieutenants, and against his own protocol, he insisted Hazel come along to review the final contract terms in real time. 2 hours before the dinner, Hazel sat in the back of Gabriel's armored Maybach, racing down Ocean Drive. Gabriel sat beside her, impeccably dressed in a tailored charcoal suit, exuding calm control. But Hazel felt sick. Her stomach churned as she stared at the encrypted tablet in her lap. She had spent the flight from New York, digging furiously into the offshore holding companies Liam O'Connor had listed as collateral for the joint venture. Liam claimed to have a war chest of $50 million sitting in a Zurich trust, ready to match Gabriel's investment. "Gabriel," Hazel said, her voice tight, breaking the silence in the car. "What is it, Mia Cara?" Gabriel asked, turning to her. The pet name slipped out, naturally, making her heart stutter, but she forced herself to focus. "This is a setup," Hazel stated, her fingers flying across the screen. "Liam O'Connor is broke." Gabriel frowned, his demeanor instantly shifting to business. "Explain." "The Zurich Trust documents they sent us are sophisticated forgeries," Hazel said quickly. "They look perfect on the surface. But I ran an algorithm checking the metadata of the PDF against standard Swiss banking encryption protocols. They don't match, so I dug deeper. I backdoor accessed the holding company's shell corp in Delaware. Liam doesn't have $50 million. He has nothing. His entire operation is over-leveraged. He owes the cartel in Mexico close to $30 million, and the debt was called due yesterday." Gabriel's jaw locked. He understood the implications instantly. He's not looking for a joint venture. He's looking for a hostile takeover, Hazel confirmed, looking into his eyes. "If you sign the agreement tonight, it links your clean corporate accounts to his shell companies. The second the ink is dry, he can drain your liquid assets to pay off his cartel debt, and he will kill you right there at the table to ensure you can't retaliate." Gabriel stared at the tablet, a cold, terrifying fury washing over his features. He tapped on the partition separating them from the driver. "Turn the car around. We're going to the private airstrip." "No," Hazel said sharply, grabbing his arm. The physical contact shocked both of them, but she didn't let go. "Gabriel, if you run, he knows you know. He's a desperate man backed into a corner by the cartel. He will wage a street war that will burn this city to the ground and cost you half your men. You can't just leave." "I am not walking into an ambush with you in the room," Gabriel growled, his protective instinct flaring. "He will have hitmen disguised as waiters. Pappy's is notorious for it." "I know," Hazel said, her mind racing, "which is why we don't just survive tonight. We destroy him without firing a single shot." Gabriel looked at her, his anger faltering in the face of her terrifying, brilliant calm. "What are you thinking?" Hazel's eyes were locked on her screen, a dark, brilliant spark igniting in her gaze. "Liam's cartel debt is managed through a digital holding firm in Panama. I have the routing numbers. The Mexican cartel is waiting for their payment tonight at midnight. Let me go into that restaurant with you. Let him think he has you cornered. Just keep him talking for 10 minutes. And what will you be doing?" Gabriel asked softly, awestruck by the ruthless mastermind sitting beside him. "I am going to freeze his last remaining domestic accounts empty whatever pennies he has left, and automatically forward a comprehensive dossier of his location, his betrayal, and his complete lack of funds directly to his cartel handlers, Hazel said flatly. By the time dessert is served, Liam O'Connor won't be your problem anymore. He'll be a dead man walking. Gabriel stared at her, the heavy silence in the Maybach, broken only by the hum of the tires on the asphalt. He slowly raised his hand, resting it on the back of her neck, his thumb caressing the soft skin beneath her hair. "You," Gabriel whispered, a mixture of profound reverence and raw desire in his voice, "are the most dangerous creature I have ever met." "Just drive to Pappy's," Hazel replied, her heart pounding, but her hands perfectly steady on the keyboard. "Let's go break an empire." They arrived at the restaurant, an old-world establishment, smelling of dry-aged beef cigar smoke and polished mahogany. The maitre d' led them to a private dining room in the back, secured behind heavy oak doors. Liam O'Connor was already there. He was a large, florid man with a shock of red hair and a smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes. He had 3 massive enforcers standing in the shadows of the room. When Gabriel walked in, Liam stood up, extending his arms in a welcoming gesture. "Gabriel." "My friend." Liam boomed. He then glanced at Hazel, his smile faltering into a smirk of bemusement. "And who is this? I didn't know you were bringing your secretary. Or did you just need someone to finish your steak for you?" Liam's men chuckled darkly from the corners. Gabriel's eyes went pitch black, but Hazel stepped forward before he could react. She didn't shrink. She didn't blush. She walked directly to the table, pulled out a chair, and set her tablet down with a heavy, authoritative thud. "I'm his chief financial strategist," Hazel said smoothly, looking Liam dead in the eye, her voice dripping with an icy calm she didn't know she possessed. "And I'd worry less about my appetite, Mr. O'Connor, and significantly more about yours, because by the end of this dinner you are going to be starving." The trap was set, and the invisible girl was about to pull the trigger. For 3 agonizing seconds, the private dining room at Pappy's was dead silent. The only sound was the faint clinking of silverware from the main restaurant, bleeding through the heavy oak doors. Liam O'Connor stared at Hazel, his florid face twitching. Then a booming, condescending laugh erupted from his chest. "You've got a lot of nerve, sweetheart," Liam sneered, wiping a tear of mirth from his eye. "Gabriel, you really let your secretary play make-believe on a tablet. Tell her to put the toy away before I get insulted." Hazel didn't blink. She didn't look at Gabriel for permission. She simply tapped the screen of her encrypted tablet twice. "I'm not bluffing, Liam," Hazel said, her voice dropping the polite veneer entirely. "I just bypassed the 2-factor authentication on your primary holding accounts at Credit Suisse and Banco Santander. You kept the passwords identical across your redundant servers. Amateur mistake." Liam stopped laughing. His eyes darted to his enforcers, then back to Hazel. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the 28.5 million you had stashed in Zurich," Hazel replied, her fingers moving in a blur across the digital keyboard. "It's currently being routed through a decentralized crypto tumbler, and it's gone. You now have a balance of 0. "You lying bitch," Liam roared, slamming his massive hands on the table. Right on cue, a sharp, piercing ping echoed in the room. It was the burner phone sitting in Liam's breast pocket. Liam froze. He slowly reached into his jacket, pulled out the phone and looked at the screen. The blood drained completely from his face, leaving him a sickly, chalky white. It wasn't a notification from his bank. It was a text from a secure Mexican area code. Hazel read the realization on his face. "That would be your handlers in Sinaloa," she said softly. I forwarded them your complete financial dossier 3 minutes ago. They know you're broke. They know you tried to use Costa Logistics to cover their debt, and they know exactly what table you are sitting at right now. Kill them, Liam shrieked, panic entirely consuming him. He reached for the heavy revolver tucked into his waistband. He never cleared the leather. Gabriel moved with the predatory grace of a striking viper. He kicked the heavy mahogany dining table upward with devastating force, pinning Liam against the back wall and knocking the wind out of him. Simultaneously, Gabriel drew his custom Sig Sauer, firing 2 silenced rounds that shattered the kneecaps of Liam's 2 lead enforcers before they could even unholster their weapons. They collapsed to the floor, screaming in agony. The 3rd enforcer threw his hands up in the air, terrified, dropping his weapon onto the carpet. Gabriel stood over the table, his gun leveled directly at the space between Liam O'Connor's terrified eyes. Liam was gasping for air, trapped between the wood and the wall, watching his empire crumble in the span of 60 seconds. "You broke the rules of a sit-down, Liam," Gabriel said, his voice a low, lethal whisper. "You brought a knife to a negotiation. My chief financial strategist just brought a nuclear bomb." Gabriel didn't pull the trigger. He didn't have to. He lowered the gun, grabbed Hazel's hand, and pulled her toward the door. "Leave him," Gabriel ordered his men. "The cartel will be here in less than 5 minutes to collect their debt. Let them have him." They walked out of the private room, through the bustling kitchen, and out the back alley door, into the humid Miami night. The Maybach was already idling. Gabriel practically threw Hazel into the back seat, sliding in right behind her as the driver hit the gas, tearing away from the restaurant, just as 2 unmarked black SUVs screeched to a halt at the front entrance. Inside the car, the adrenaline crash hit Hazel like a freight train. Her hands, which had been so perfectly steady while dismantling a multi-million-dollar crime syndicate, began to violently shake. She dropped the tablet onto the floorboard and pressed her hands over her face, dragging in ragged, shaky breaths. She felt Gabriel shift closer. The partition was up. They were completely alone in the dim, luxurious expanse of the back seat. "Look at me," Gabriel commanded gently. Hazel shook her head, tears of pure, unadulterated stress prickling her eyes. "I can't. I'm shaking. I feel ridiculous." Gabriel reached out his large, warm hands, gently pulling her wrists away from her face. He didn't mock her fear. He respected it. He pulled her across the leather seat until she was pressed against his side, tucking her head under his chin. He wrapped a strong arm around her thick waist, holding her securely, grounding her in his physical presence. "You are the furthest thing from ridiculous," Gabriel murmured into her hair. "What you did in there. I have men who have worked for my family for 20 years, who don't have a fraction of the ice in their veins that you do." Hazel rested her cheek against the fine wool of his suit, listening to the steady, reassuring thud of his heart. "They look at me, and they think I'm weak, Gabriel. They look at my body and assume my mind matches it. Soft. Easy to push around." Gabriel cupped her face, tilting her head up so she was forced to look into his dark, blazing eyes. The streetlights of Ocean Drive strobed through the tinted windows, illuminating the raw, unfiltered hunger in his expression. "Let them be blind," Gabriel whispered fiercely. "Let them underestimate the beautiful, soft woman sitting next to me. Because I see you, Hazel. I see the absolute genius of you. You are the most powerful weapon I possess." He didn't ask for permission this time. He leaned down and captured her lips with his. The kiss wasn't tentative. It was consuming tasting of expensive whiskey and adrenaline. Hazel gasped, her hands instinctively clutching the lapels of his jacket. For her entire life, she had tried to shrink to take up less space, to apologize for her size. But Gabriel didn't want her to shrink. He pulled her closer, his hands tangling in her thick, dark hair, making her feel cherished, entirely desired, and dangerously vital. When they finally broke apart, breathless in the back of the speeding Maybach, Gabriel rested his forehead against hers. "You aren't just my strategist anymore, Hazel," he told her, his voice rough. "You're my partner, in everything, and God help anyone who tries to stand in your way." By the time they returned to New York, the dynamic within Costa Logistics had fundamentally shifted. Hazel was no longer a civilian working behind the scenes. She was the undisputed second-in-command. Gabriel moved her out of her modest Queens apartment and into a secure, state-of-the-art suite in the Four Seasons private residences in downtown Manhattan, fully paid for by the company. Her mother's medical care was upgraded to an elite private-duty nursing team. But with absolute power came absolute resentment. Donovan Mercer was an old-school relic. He was Gabriel's senior underboss, a man who had served Gabriel's father and believed the mob should operate on blood fear and tradition. He wore pinstripe suits, drank heavily at lunch, and despised everything Hazel represented. To Donovan, women in the life were meant to be silent, decorative wives draped in diamonds looking the other way. He despised Hazel's intellect, but he hated her appearance even more. He viewed Gabriel's reliance on a chubby, soft-spoken accountant as a grotesque vulnerability. And in the treacherous world of the syndicate, perceived vulnerability was an invitation to strike. 3 weeks after the Miami incident, Gabriel was summoned to a mandatory sit-down with the 5 families in Staten Island. It was a high-security event. No lieutenants, no advisors, just the bosses. He would be entirely off the grid and unreachable for at least 6 hours. Hazel remained in her Four Seasons penthouse running compliance checks on a new fleet of cargo ships docked in Newark. She was sitting at her sprawling command center, 3 curved monitors illuminating her face in the darkened room. Around 9 p.m., she noticed a discrepancy. She was cross-referencing the internal security logs of the Costa Logistics main servers. Someone was trying to scrub a massive digital footprint from the AWS cloud backups. Hazel narrowed her eyes, her fingers flying across the mechanical keyboard. She ran a trace, bouncing her signal through proxy servers to mask her presence. The data being deleted wasn't financial, it was logistical. Cargo manifests. Specifically the manifests for a shipment of illegal firearms that Costa Logistics had absolutely refused to transport for a rogue Russian faction a month prior. Someone was forging documents to make it look like Hazel had authorized the transport, quietly framing her for an unsanctioned arms deal that would bring the wrath of the FBI and the 5 families down on her head. Hazel traced the IP address of the active user. It originated from Donovan Mercer's private club in Brooklyn. Her blood ran cold. Donovan wasn't just trying to frame her. He was creating a paper trail to justify her execution to the rest of the family. He was going to present her to the commission as a rogue operator, killing her to protect Gabriel. Hazel grabbed her phone to call Gabriel, but the line was dead. The screen read, "No service." She frowned, walking over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. She looked at her phone again. A penthouse in the Four Seasons didn't have dead zones. She ran to the heavy oak double doors of her suite and checked the digital keypad. The green light was off. The physical deadbolts had dropped into place. The building's localized Crestron smart system had been hijacked from the outside. She was locked in. Panic threatened to choke her, but Hazel ruthlessly pushed it down. She walked back to her monitors. Think she ordered herself. Donovan knows he can't just shoot me on the street. It's too messy. He needs it to look like a suicide, or he needs to interrogate me for my passwords before he kills me. She accessed the building's internal security feed. The cameras on her floor, the 68th floor, had been looped, showing an empty hallway. But she accessed the elevator shaft sensors. 3 men in heavy tactical gear were currently riding the private service elevator up to her penthouse. They had bypassed the doorman. She had less than 4 minutes. Hazel didn't have a gun, and even if she did, she was no match for 3 professional hitmen. But Donovan Mercer had made a fatal miscalculation. He assumed, because he had locked her in, she was trapped. He forgot that Hazel controlled the entire digital nervous system of the Costa Empire. She sat down and went to work. First, she engaged the dead man's switch. It was a protocol she and Gabriel had designed. She typed in a 50-character alphanumeric code. If she didn't enter a secondary cancellation password within 10 minutes, a massive encrypted data dump would automatically fire directly to Gabriel's secure satellite phone, the cell phones of every capo in the Costa family, and for good measure, the front desk of the New York Times. The data contained undeniable, irrefutable proof of Donovan Mercer embezzling from the widow's fund over the last decade, a crime punishable by agonizing death in the mob. Second, she hijacked the penthouse environment. She tapped into the localized server box hidden in the coat closet. The hitmen were using thermal imaging goggles. She knew this because standard tactical sweeps in dark, high-rise buildings required them. Hazel accessed the Crestron HVAC controls. She cranked the penthouse ambient temperature up to 95 degrees, while simultaneously initiating the emergency localized underfloor heating system, pushing it to maximum output. Within 2 minutes, the entire apartment would be glowing white-hot on a thermal camera, effectively blinding them. Third, she turned off her monitors, grabbed her encrypted backup hard drive, and moved. She didn't hide in the bedroom or the bathroom. That's where they would look first. Because of her size, they would assume she couldn't fit into tight spaces. She moved to the kitchen, opened the massive industrial walk-in pantry, and squeezed herself into the narrow, dark ventilation utility access panel behind the dry goods shelving. It was a suffocatingly tight fit, her shoulders scraping against the drywall, but she pulled the panel shut just as she heard the heavy metallic clank of the service elevator arriving. The front doors were breached with a muffled, suppressed explosive charge. Hazel held her breath in the darkness, clutching the hard drive to her chest. She could hear the heavy boots moving methodically across the hardwood floors. "Thermal is useless," one of the men growled, his voice muffled by a tactical mask. "The whole damn floor is glowing. The heat is maxed out." "Spread out," another ordered. "She's a big girl, she can't hide well. Check the closets." Hazel closed her eyes, forcing her breathing to remain shallow. She watched the glowing numbers on her digital watch. 7 minutes until the dead man's switch activates. They tore the apartment apart. She heard glass shattering doors being kicked off their hinges and the violent tearing of furniture. They were getting frustrated. "She's not here," the lead hitman barked into his radio. "I'm telling you, Mercer, the place is empty." "Check again." Donovan's voice crackled furiously over the radio, loud enough for Hazel to hear through the drywall. She didn't fly out the window. Find her. 3 minutes. Footsteps approached the pantry. The door swung open. A flashlight beam swept across the shelves of pasta-expensive olive oils and canned goods. The beam lingered on the wall right in front of Hazel's face. She squeezed her eyes shut, her heart hammering so violently she was certain the man could hear it. "Clear," the hitman grunted, turning around and walking out. 1 minute. Hazel didn't move. She waited in the sweltering heat of the access panel, sweat pouring down her face, soaking through her silk blouse. 10 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. The transmission sent. Simultaneously, 40 miles away in Staten Island, Gabriel Costa's satellite phone vibrated violently in his pocket. He ignored the scowling faces of the rival bosses, pulled it out, and read the first line of the message. Code red. "Donovan is a traitor. Breach at 4 Seasons." Gabriel stood up his chair, violently scraping against the floorboards. The room went dead silent. "We are done here." Gabriel snarled his eyes, burning with a rage so terrifying that none of the other bosses dared to stop him. He didn't look back. He sprinted for his car, pulling his weapon, knowing that if Donovan had laid a single finger on Hazel, he wouldn't just kill the man. He would erase his entire bloodline from the face of the earth. Inside the sweltering dark utility vent, Hazel's lungs burned. The ambient temperature in the penthouse had crossed 100 degrees, turning the confined space into a suffocating kiln. Sweat stung her eyes, but she held the encrypted hard drive so tightly her fingers ached. She could hear the hitmen cursing violently in the living room as their encrypted burner phones simultaneously erupted with frantic alerts. "The files leaked!" One of the men shouted, his voice cracking with sudden, overwhelming panic. "Mercer's accounts, the widow's fund, the Swiss transfers, it's all over the syndicate network. We are entirely burned." "Forget the girl." The lead hitman roared, the sound of breaking glass, echoing as he likely kicked a table out of his way. "Get to the elevator. If Costa finds out we're here, we're dead." Footsteps thundered toward the front doors. Hazel squeezed her eyes shut, praying the reinforced steel of the service elevator would delay them. It did more than delay them. A deafening metallic shriek ripped through the apartment as the primary elevator doors were forcibly blown off their tracks by a breaching charge. The explosion shook the floorboards beneath Hazel's cramped hiding spot. Gabriel had not waited for his security team. He had not called for backup. He had driven his Aston Martin onto the sidewalk, bypassed the lobby entirely, and overridden the high-speed executive lift. Gunfire erupted instantly. It wasn't a prolonged firefight. It was an execution. Gabriel moved with the terrifying, cold-blooded efficiency of a man who had been bred for war. 3 suppressed shots echoed in rapid succession, thwip, 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 followed by the heavy, lifeless thuds of bodies hitting the Italian marble floors. Silence descended heavy and absolute, broken only by the aggressive hum of the overworked HVAC system trying to cool the blistering apartment. Hazel. Gabriel's roar tore through the penthouse. It was a sound of raw, unhinged terror that she had never heard from the fiercely composed Mafia boss. "Hazel, where are you?" She pushed against the drywall access panel. Her hands were slick with sweat slipping against the painted wood. "Gabriel." She choked out her voice, raspy from the heat. "In the kitchen." Heavy, rapid footsteps approached the pantry. The door was ripped open, tearing the hinges straight out of the doorframe. Gabriel's large hands grasped the edges of the utility panel and effortlessly tore the wooden covering away, exposing her in the dark recess. He didn't care about the heat. He didn't care that his bespoke suit was instantly ruined by the soot and dust. Gabriel reached into the narrow space, wrapping his strong arms around her waist, and pulled her out of the vent. She collapsed against his chest, her legs shaking too violently to support her weight. Gabriel caught her, lifting her entirely off the ground and carrying her out of the blistering kitchen into the slightly cooler air of the ruined living room. He set her down gently on the only intact piece of furniture, a leather loveseat, and dropped to his knees in front of her. His hands roamed frantically over her arms, her face, her neck searching for blood. "Are you hurt?" Gabriel demanded, his dark eyes wide, his chest heaving. "Did they touch you? Tell me." "No." Hazel gasped, taking deep, greedy pulls of oxygen. She held up the hard drive. "I locked them out. I bypassed the thermals. They couldn't find me." Gabriel stared at her, taking in her disheveled hair, her sweat-soaked blouse, and the absolute, terrifying brilliance shining in her eyes. The realization of what she had done, how she had outsmarted a highly trained hit squad while trapped in a locked room, washed over him. He let out a ragged breath, pressing his forehead against her knees. "You are spectacular," Gabriel whispered, his voice thick with an emotion that bordered on worship. He looked up at her, his expression hardening into something lethally cold. "Stay here with my men. They will be up in 2 minutes to secure the building." Hazel grabbed his lapel before he could stand. "Where are you going?" "Donovan Mercer tried to murder the woman I love." Gabriel stated the confession, slipping out with brutal, undeniable honesty. "I am going to Brooklyn. I am going to burn his club to the ground with him inside it." Hazel's heart slammed against her ribs at his words, but her strategic mind instantly took over. She tightened her grip on his jacket. "No," Hazel said firmly. "If you kill him in a rage, his loyalists will call it a rash vendetta. They will fracture the family. You need to execute him strategically." Gabriel paused, his predatory instincts warring with his profound respect for her intellect. "He is entirely exposed, Hazel. The commission has the files." "Exactly," Hazel replied, her breathing finally steadying. "He doesn't know you survived the hit. He thinks his men succeeded, and he thinks the data dump was a dead man's switch triggered by my death. Let him walk into the commission tomorrow morning, believing he won. Let him stand in front of the 5 families and lie to their faces. And then, you walk in." A slow, dark, beautiful smile spread across Gabriel's face. It was the smile of a predator recognizing the trap his mate had just laid. He leaned forward, cupping her face, and kissed her fiercely. "We do it your way," Gabriel agreed softly. The boardroom at the Plaza Hotel was an opulent fortress. Thick velvet curtains blocked out the morning sun, and 10 of the most dangerous men in North America sat around a massive mahogany table. Donovan Mercer stood at the head of the room, looking somber in his pinstripe suit, attempting to feign grief. "It is a tragedy," Donovan announced, addressing the heads of the 5 families. Gabriel Costa's obsession with this girl, this amateur accountant, compromised our security. The data leak last night was her doing. She was working with the feds. I tried to intervene, but I arrived too late. The girl is dead, and Gabriel has gone into hiding." Murmurs of discontent rippled through the room. The boss's older men, who already distrusted modern technology, looked deeply unsettled by the massive leak of their offshore financials. "Are you absolutely certain Costa is gone?" Mercer asked Roman, a heavily scarred boss from Chicago. Before Donovan could answer, the heavy oak doors of the boardroom swung open. The silence that fell over the room was absolute and suffocating. Gabriel Costa strode into the room, impeccably dressed in a pitch-black suit, radiating a murderous aura that made even the hardened mob bosses hold their breath. But Gabriel didn't walk in alone. By his side, her arm securely tucked through his, was Hazel. She was no longer hiding. She wasn't wearing cheap, oversized blazers meant to disguise her figure. She wore a custom-tailored, deep emerald green dress that hugged her curves flawlessly, projecting confidence, power, and unapologetic presence. Her thick, dark hair cascaded over her shoulders, and her eyes were cold, calculating, and entirely unafraid. Donovan Mercer turned the color of wet ash. He took a stumbling step backward, his mouth opening and closing, as he stared at the woman he had ordered killed less than 12 hours ago. Gabriel for Roman said, breaking the silence, his hand slowly inching toward his jacket. "Mercer just told us. Mercer is a traitor." Gabriel interrupted, his voice slicing through the room like a physical blade. He didn't look at Roman. His dead black eyes were locked entirely on Donovan. He embezzled $8 million from the Widows' Fund over 10 years. He colluded with the Russian faction, and last night he sent 3 mercenaries to my home to murder my chief strategist, to cover his tracks. "Lies!" Donovan shouted, his voice cracking with pure panic. "She manipulated the data. Look at her. She's a witch. A hacker. She's playing all of us." Hazel stepped forward effortlessly, slipping her arm from Gabriel's. The room watched, mesmerized and terrified, as this soft, beautiful woman walked directly up to the sprawling conference table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "I didn't manipulate anything, Donovan," Hazel said, her tone conversational, but dripping with venom. She placed a single, sleek black tablet on the mahogany surface and slid it toward the center of the table. "Every transaction, every IP address, every forged signature you used to steal from these men is documented there, including the wiring of $200,000 to a shell corporation yesterday afternoon to pay for the hitmen." She looked around the room, meeting the eyes of every single mob boss. Men who had previously scoffed at her weight, who had dismissed her as a glorified secretary, now looked at her with profound, undeniable fear. They realized in that freezing moment that the chubby girl they had ignored held the keys to their entire empires. She could bankrupt them with a keystroke. She could expose their deepest secrets while eating breakfast. "Donovan Mercer is a liability to our shared ecosystem," Hazel stated coldly, stepping back to Gabriel's side. Gabriel looked at the other bosses. "The Costa family finds him guilty. Does anyone dispute the evidence?" Nobody spoke. Roman slowly shook his head, leaning back in his chair. The verdict was unanimous. Donovan lunged for the door, but Gabriel was faster. In one fluid motion, Gabriel drew his weapon and fired a single round. Donovan collapsed to the floor, dead, before his head hit the Persian rug. Gabriel didn't flinch. He holstered his weapon, turning his attention to the remaining men at the table. He reached out and gently rested his hand on the small of Hazel's back, a deeply possessive, protective gesture that left zero room for misinterpretation. "Let me make something entirely clear to this commission," Gabriel said, his voice echoing in the silent room. "Hazel is not my secretary. She is not my advisor. She is my partner. She is the architect of the Costa family's future. Any disrespect toward her, any whisper, any slight, any thought of crossing her, will be considered an act of war against me personally." Gabriel looked down at Hazel, his expression softening into a look of absolute devotion that made her breath catch. "She controls the board. I just enforce her rules." They walked out of the Plaza Hotel together, leaving the most powerful men in the country trembling in their wake. Hazel stepped out into the bright Manhattan sunlight, feeling the warm breeze against her face. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer the chubby girl hiding in the corner. She was the queen of the syndicate, and the deadliest man in the city would burn the world to the ground just to see her smile. Power isn't always about physical strength. Sometimes it's about having a mind sharp enough to dismantle an empire from a keyboard. Hazel proved that being underestimated is the greatest weapon a brilliant woman can wield, transforming from an invisible judged accountant into the undisputed queen of the Costa Syndicate. She didn't change herself to fit their ruthless world. She bent their entire world to her intellect and earned the absolute devotion of the city's most dangerous man in the process. Gabriel learned that true loyalty and lethal precision come in unexpected packages. If you loved this story of mafia romance, high-stakes drama, and a fierce female protagonist outsmarting her enemies, please like this video, share it with your friends, and subscribe to our channel. Hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling story. Let us know in the comments what your favorite plot twist was.